Turkey says an agreement has been reached with Russia to allow Ukraine to resume exports of grain through the Black Sea. Russian Defence Minister Sergei Shoigu is en route to Turkey to sign the deal, and Ukraine's infrastructure minister is also expected to attend the ceremony. The world shortage of Ukrainian grain since Russia's invasion has left millions at risk of hunger. More than 20 million tons of grain are stuck in silos in the Black Sea ports of Ukraine. The deal to unblock the exports is the first major accord between the two warring sides. Now let's bring in DW correspondent Julia Hahn, who is joining us from Istanbul. Julia, a deal on grain exports is expected to be signed today. What more can you tell us?
Well, there has been a growing sense of urgency to find a solution that would finally allow Ukraine to reopen its Black Sea ports and resume grain exports. Grain exports that, as you mentioned, are urgently needed because the world faces shortages and higher food prices. So the United Nations and Turkey have been trying for weeks now to broker a deal, a compromise between Moscow and Kyiv. So this is a UN-led process, but Ankara's role is also quite interesting. The Turkish government has good relations with both Ukraine and Russia. They have offered to mediate in this war. In fact, they have performed a quite delicate balancing act between Russia and the West, but they have managed to bring delegations from both countries together here in Turkey. There has been a round of grain talks last week here in Istanbul on a technical level, and if not derailed at the last minute, a deal will be signed here today in this building right behind me, the Dolmabahce Palace in Istanbul. Later in the afternoon, the signing will be attended by Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
Now, that deal, what will it look like? Do we know any details?
The full details of this deal have not been made public yet, but we do know that security is a top issue for the Ukrainian government. A Ukrainian foreign ministry spokesperson said that the Ukrainian delegation would only accept a solution that guarantees the safety of its southern regions and the secure export of its agricultural products. So Russia would have to make a promise, a credible one, not to attack Ukrainian ports and cargo ships. The deal also provides for the creation of a UN-run control center here in Istanbul at this strategic location near the Black Sea, where grain exports would be overseen. The two sides have reportedly also agreed on inspecting ships that are going to Ukraine, coming from Ukraine, to make sure there are no weapons or other military equipment on board. That's been a Russian demand. What is less clear is right now how and if Ukraine would have to demine its ports, and what compromise has been found on Moscow's demand to ease restrictions on Russian exports of food and fertilizers.
Now, both sides have been, at least publicly, very quiet about this deal. Are there any doubt it will come to pass?
Well, this deal, if signed, would be one of the most significant compromises reached between Moscow and Kyiv in this conflict so far. There is just so much at stake. The United Nations have repeatedly warned of a global hunger crisis affecting particularly countries in the Middle East and Africa who depend on Ukrainian grain. The Turkish president, interestingly, said any deal, as soon as it's reached, a plan could be put into action. Others have cautioned that it might actually take a couple of weeks to get Ukrainian grain exports going. But then there is, of course, a difference between what's written down and signed on a piece of paper and the situation, the realities on the ground. We know the Ukrainian government has accused Russia of intensifying strikes on Ukrainian cities in recent weeks. So what will be key at the end is, of course, the implementation of this deal.
Our correspondent, Julia Hahn, there reporting from Istanbul. Thank you, Julia.
Well, earlier I spoke with DW correspondent Fanny Fashar in Kyiv. She had more on that deal on grain exports between Ukraine and Russia.
Well, most of these reports are actually coming from Turkey. Turkey really tries to brand itself as the main mediator here because they are the ones that announced yesterday, the presidency office there, that a deal is going to be signed later this afternoon in Istanbul. Now, we do not know the exact details of this deal. Also, we didn't hear anything from Russia so far about this deal. And Ukraine was also a little bit, how should I say, not very clear on whether a deal is going to be signed, just saying that they expect some news coming out of Turkey today. What we do know, looking back what happened last week, these discussions among Ukrainian, Russian officials brokered via UN and also Turkey to agree on some sort of a ceasefire, because obviously without the ceasefire, it's impossible to get those vessels full of grains through safe corridors. But this is the big question here, actually. If an agreement is put into a written format, whether all these counterparts can agree on that in practical terms, whether ceasefire can actually be maintained or even starting in these ports like Odessa or Mykolaiv as well, because these are key portal towns in regions that are heavily shelled and bombed by Russian forces. So a lot of things remain sketchy, while at the same time, of course, people are hopeful here in Ukraine, because exporting that grain would not only mean that you can ease the food crisis, but also, of course, you can make money that Ukraine needs in order to continue this war and to have a chance in this war against Russian forces.
Funny, Thursday left the distinct impression Russia was broadening the scope of its attacks once more. But President Zelensky says that Ukrainian troops are gaining momentum. What's your read from there?
There are different ways to look at this. If you zoom in on the Donbas region, for example, there's a lot of shelling going on, especially when you look at towns like Kramatorsk or Bakhmut, which are quite close to Sloviansk, which is a very, very important town. It is Ukrainian-controlled, basically the administrative center of the Donetsk region. And this is exactly where Russian forces would like to move into, because, as you may remember, neighboring Luhansk region, there the town Severodonetsk was the key center to take in, to actually control the entire Luhansk region. So we're going to hear a lot more about Sloviansk in the coming days, but also about all that indiscriminate shelling that we've been seeing in the report, for example, in Kharkiv region. At the same time, yes, it seems like Ukrainian forces also do have a momentum given by Western weapon supplies, especially the HIMARS. They have a range of 80 kilometers and can strike various supply chains of Russia. We have to see how this develops. Certainly, the war in Ukraine is at a turning point.
DW correspondent Fanny Fashar, thank you.